Have you ever sat in silence feeling like something's wrong, but you can't explain what? Your body is tired, your mind is restless, and deep inside, something aches, but not from an injury, from something more abstract, more subtle, more human. Carl Jung once said, "Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom, not a disease, not a malfunction, but a message. A signal that your soul is suffocating under a life that doesn't match who you really are." In today's world, we treat anxiety like a glitch. We medicate it, avoid it, numb it, scroll it away. But what if anxiety isn't here to be silenced? What if it's here to be heard? What if your anxiety is not something to fight, but something to follow? In this journey, we won't just talk about symptoms, we'll talk about meaning, about the inner conflict between the life you live and the life you long for. Because until you bridge that gap, no pill, no distraction, no escape will ever truly make you whole. You weren't born anxious. You were born aware, sensitive, open, but the world you were born into moves too fast. It demands too much, it speaks too loud, and it never stops. Your nervous system wasn't built for a reality that never rests. News alerts, endless content, opinions layered on opinions, until your own voice is buried beneath them. You wake up tired, you scroll before you even breathe, you compare your life to filtered highlights of people you've never met, and somehow, you always feel behind. Carl Jung warned of this spiritual erosion, a subtle disconnection from the self caused not just by trauma, but by distraction. And the modern world is full of it. Not just noise, but psychic pressure. We're flooded with choices, but starved of meaning. We're more connected than ever, yet lonelier than we've ever been. No wonder anxiety thrives here. Not because you're broken, but because you're absorbing a reality that violates your nature. Think about it. We live in an age of overexposure. Too much information, too much stimulation, too little stillness. Your mind is exhausted not because you've failed, but because it's been stretched too thin for too long. And in that overwhelm, you lose yourself, piece by piece. Jung believed this fragmentation of the self is where anxiety is born, not always from catastrophe, but from the slow decay of not recognizing who you've become. You try to keep up, to stay relevant, to meet expectations that were never yours. And in doing so, you silence the parts of you that once felt whole. So your body speaks, through tension, through panic, through that quiet voice whispering, "This isn't who I am." Anxiety is not weakness. It's resistance. It's a rebellion from the soul, screaming that something sacred is being denied. You don't need to silence it. You need to listen. Because before anxiety consumes you, it tries to guide you. And if you're willing to pause, to question, to feel, you might hear what it's been trying to say all along. Slow down. Come back to yourself. This world is fast, but you don't have to be. You scroll through your feed, and everyone seems to be living beautifully. Perfect smiles, perfect homes, perfect relationships, perfect purpose. And even if you know it's curated, some part of you still wonders, why don't I feel that way? This is how the lie spreads, not through facts, but through atmosphere, through repetition, through subtle comparisons that infect your soul without you even noticing. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He believed that suffering often begins the moment we begin to betray ourselves in order to meet the expectations of others. And no expectation is more suffocating than the expectation to be perfect. Perfection is a prison. It's polished on the outside, but hollow within. It demands constant performance and punishes authenticity. You begin to wear a smile that isn't yours. You say yes when your heart says no. You climb ladders that lean against walls you never wanted to be near. And slowly, your life becomes a costume. Anxiety doesn't always come from what's happening. It comes from what's not happening, the parts of you you've abandoned. You feel out of place in your own skin, not because you're failing, but because you're performing and the pressure builds. You begin to feel like a fraud, like no matter how much you achieve, it's never enough. And it won't be, because it was never meant to fulfill you. Jung would call this a loss of alignment, a disconnection between your outer image and your inner truth. The soul knows when it's being faked, and it speaks through symptoms, through restlessness, through exhaustion, through the quiet ache of a life that looks good, but feels empty. So you have a choice. You can keep chasing a version of life that earns applause but steals your peace. Or you can begin the slow, honest work of becoming real. Not perfect, not admired, just true. And that truth, that return to your imperfect self, might just be the beginning of peace you haven't felt in years. There is a unique kind of pain that doesn't come from the outside, not from loss, not from rejection, not even from failure. It comes from living a life that isn't yours, from saying yes when your soul whispers no, from following a path that looks right but feels wrong, from becoming everything you're supposed to be, while slowly forgetting who you are. Carl Jung didn't just see anxiety as a chemical imbalance, he saw it as a spiritual contradiction, a fracture between your outer life and your inner truth. And the wider that gap becomes, the louder the anxiety gets. You can feel it in the job that drains you, in the relationship that silences you, in the routine that numbs you, in the quiet moments when no one's watching, and the emptiness swells like a tide. You're not just tired, you're out of alignment. Anxiety begins when your actions are at war with your authenticity. You live to meet expectations, you sacrifice your intuition, you dismiss the voice inside you that says, "This isn't it." And the longer you ignore it, the more your soul fights back. It shows up as restlessness, as unease, as tension in the body, because the body always remembers what the mind tries to forget. Jung called this the divided self. When your ego serves society, but your spirit serves something deeper. And in that war, anxiety becomes the battlefield. You feel it in your chest, not because something is wrong with you, but because you've wandered too far from what is right for you. So what's the way back? It's not found in perfection, or performance, or pleasing everyone else. It's found in reconnection to your values, to your voice, to the life you were meant to live, not the one you were trained to endure. You are not here to be a mirror for someone else's dream. You are here to remember your own. And when you begin to align your life with the quiet knowing inside you, the anxiety that once haunted you starts to fade, because it was never your enemy. It was your soul begging you to come home. You used to hear yourself, clearly, softly, naturally, before the noise, before the headlines, before the likes, the comments, the notifications, before the world convinced you that your voice wasn't enough. Now it's different. You open your eyes in the morning, and before you even meet your breath, you meet a screen. You meet opinions. You meet the pressure to stay updated, to stay relevant, to stay in the loop of a world that never sleeps. Carl Jung warned us, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And that's what noise has become. A socially acceptable form of avoidance, a way to run from the self without ever leaving the room. We scroll, not for information, but for distraction, for sedation, for the illusion of connection. But every click, every swipe, every scroll is a trade, less of you, for more of them. You lose silence. You lose reflection. You lose the sacred space where your own thoughts once lived. And in that void, anxiety grows, not because you're weak, but because you've been pulled too far from your center. You start to confuse noise for truth, productivity for worth, performance for peace, but your soul knows the difference. And when it can't be heard, it begins to scream. That scream is anxiety, not a malfunction, a warning, a desperate signal that your inner world is drowning beneath the weight of the outer. And the worst part, You start to believe that your intuition is broken, that your inner voice is gone, but it's not gone. It's just buried under too many layers of everything that doesn't belong to you. So how do you remember it? You unplug, you pause, you retreat into silence, not as an escape, but as a return. Because stillness is not emptiness. Stillness is where the truth speaks. And your truth, it's still waiting, still whole, still whispering beneath the noise. Come back. I never left. I've just been waiting for you to listen again. There are two versions of you, the one the world sees and the one that stares back at you in silence when no one else is around. One is polished, pleasant, acceptable. The other is raw, restless, buried. Carl Jung called this split a psychic wound, a fracture between your persona, the mask you wear to fit in, and your authentic self, the truth you were born with. And the farther apart those two selves drift, the more pain you carry. It starts small. You say yes when you mean no. You laugh when you want to cry. You pursue a life that pleases others, even as it slowly empties you from within. Over time, it becomes habit, then identity, then prison. You begin to perform so well that you forget you're performing, but your body remembers, your soul remembers, and anxiety becomes the symptom of a self that can no longer tolerate the lie, because pretending is exhausting. And what we call burnout is often the emotional cost of living someone else's life. You feel like a fraud, but you're not a fraud. You're just misaligned. You've betrayed nothing but yourself. Jung believed this betrayal is not just painful. It's dangerous because the self you silence doesn't die. It waits. It waits behind the fake smiles, behind the roles, behind the rehearsed confidence you show to the world. And the more you ignore it, the louder it knocks, until it becomes anxiety, panic, dissociation, depression, not because you're broken, but because you've been at war with yourself. You can't be at peace externally if you are at war internally. So how do you begin to reconcile? Not by tearing down your life in one day, but by telling yourself the truth in one small place, by admitting, this version of me is not who I came here to be. From there, everything changes, not quickly, not neatly, but honestly. Because peace doesn't come from being perfect, it comes from being whole. And wholeness begins the moment you stop pretending. Sometimes when life becomes too much, you don't break down, you shrink, you retreat, you collapse inward. You go back to versions of yourself that once felt safer, quieter, simpler, but safety isn't always healing, and not all silence is peace. Carl Jung called this act of retreat regression, a subtle escape from present-day challenges back into the emotional shelters of childhood. You stop growing, not because you can't, but because growth feels like a threat. So you stay in the familiar, in routines that numb you, in beliefs that limit you, in identities that feel small but predictable. And slowly, you lose your edge, your drive, your fire. But that regression doesn't make life easier. It just makes it smaller. And over time, the body rebels. Anxiety rises, not because something new is wrong, but because something old is controlling you. You've outgrown the cage, but you're still clinging to the bars. Why? Because deep down you believe that moving forward might expose you, might hurt you, might ask you to become someone you're not ready to be. But Jung understood something crucial. What you resist not only persists, it grows in power. The inner child doesn't want to run forever. The self doesn't want to hide forever. The psyche longs to expand, but when fear wins, we regress. We relive old patterns. We replay outdated identities. We protect ourselves in ways that quietly destroy us. And here's the hard truth. Anxiety often isn't your enemy. It's your body's protest against the part of you that keeps pretending you're still too small to rise. You are not that child anymore. You are not as powerless as you once were. You are not bound by the story you had to believe in order to survive. You've grown. You just haven't realized it yet. So yes, stepping forward feels unsafe, but staying stuck is far more dangerous. Because the life you want can't meet you in your past. It's waiting for the version of you who's finally ready to stop running and start rising. We've been taught to fear anxiety, to silence it, to numb it, to diagnose it as a malfunction of the mind. But Carl Jung saw something different, something deeper. He saw anxiety as a signal, a guide, a reflection of the soul in distress. Not something to eliminate, but something to understand. Because what if your anxiety is not random? What if it speaks in symptoms because words have failed? What if it tightens your chest because something inside you is trying to get your attention? We live in a world obsessed with quick fixes. Take a pill, watch a video, follow a method. But Jung asked the harder question, what is your suffering trying to teach you? Because anxiety doesn't appear without a reason. It's not noise, it's information. It shows up when you've lost direction, when you've drifted from your truth, when you've ignored your needs, your values, your instincts for too long. And when the soul is silenced, it speaks through the body. Panic, insomnia, overthinking, tension, restlessness, all of it. Signs that something within you is being denied. And the more you suppress the message, the more violent it becomes. That's why it intensifies. That's why it returns. Not because it's evil, but because it's urgent. Imagine if instead of fighting it, you sat with it. You asked it why it came. You listened. What would it say? Maybe you're living out of alignment. You're betraying your creativity. You've lost your purpose. You're afraid to become who you really are, not to hurt you, but to wake you. Because every time you numb it, you also numb the path it's trying to reveal. Healing doesn't begin with resistance. It begins with attention. So the next time anxiety knocks, don't slam the door. Ask what it came to show you. Because beneath its chaos is often a sacred truth that your life is ready to change. And your soul refuses to wait any longer. There are tasks you were never taught in school, but your soul knows them by heart. They are ancient, invisible, and unavoidable. Carl Jung believed that each of us is born into life with a set of essential spiritual tasks. Not jobs, not achievements, not goals for external success, but inner assignments meant to guide your growth, to separate from your past, to face your shadow, to seek meaning over comfort, to accept death, to discover who you are beyond what the world told you to be. And when we avoid these tasks, we don't just feel lost, we feel sick. Anxiety begins to whisper, then scream, because the soul won't let you hide forever. You may think your suffering comes from circumstances, from work, from money, from relationships, but often it's deeper. You're anxious because you've paused a journey that was never meant to be paused. You've chosen the illusion of stability over the discomfort of becoming. You've silenced questions like, what do I truly want? What parts of myself have I buried? Am I living or just surviving? What will I leave behind? And those questions don't disappear. They echo in the background. They haunt your quiet moments. They take shape in symptoms, in exhaustion, irritability, dread. But they're not punishments. They're reminders. Jung believed that what we call neurosis is often the soul's resistance to being ignored, because the tasks don't go away. They wait. They follow you, and if you resist long enough, they manifest as anxiety, depression, compulsions, not to punish you, but to redirect you. You may be avoiding growth because it threatens your comfort, but stagnation has its own cost: numbness, resentment, regression. So maybe anxiety isn't a breakdown. Maybe it's a buildup of truth, of pressure, of unrealized potential trying to break through the shell you've mistaken for protection. You don't have to fix everything today. but you do have to turn toward it, because the path won't chase you, but it will wait for you, patiently, painfully, until you decide, I'm ready to carry what my soul came here to carry. There's a silent myth we all inherit, that if we avoid the hard things, if we stay quiet, if we keep everything the same, we'll be safe. But that's a lie, because what you don't face doesn't disappear, it festers. Carl Jung warned of this with urgency. He said the soul does not tolerate avoidance for long, and when we refuse to grow, we pay for it. Not with visible scars, but with invisible erosion. You stop dreaming, you stop risking, you stop becoming. Not because life demands it, but because fear whispered, stay here, it's easier. And maybe it is for a while. But comfort, when worshipped, becomes a coffin. And the longer you stay in the known, the more unknown you become to yourself. Anxiety isn't the enemy of growth. Avoidance is. Avoidance builds quietly. It turns weeks into years, potential into regret, authenticity into performance. And the more you suppress your evolution, the heavier the symptoms become. First, it's a flicker of restlessness. Then fatigue, disconnection, bitterness, until you wake up one day and can't remember who you were before you started hiding. Jung called this the moral failure of the psyche. Not failure in a religious sense, but failure to act with courage, to meet the tasks of your destiny with your full presence. Because deep down, you know what you need to do. You know the change is calling your name. But knowing is not enough. Not acting is a choice too. And that choice slowly robs you of self-respect, of meaning, of life force. So ask yourself, what is your comfort really costing you? Because you don't just pay for growth with discomfort, you pay for stagnation with your soul. And the tragedy? By the time most people feel that cost, they've already taught themselves to live without feeling at all. But not you. You're still here, still breathing, still capable of turning around. And it begins with one decision, to stop pretending you're fine and start becoming who you were meant to be. Healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about coming home to what you've always been, beneath the anxiety, beneath the roles, beneath the polished mask you show to the world. There is a self that never left. Carl Jung didn't speak of perfection, he spoke of wholeness. And wholeness isn't about getting everything right. It's about integrating everything that's been left behind. The fear, the grief, the doubt, the anger, not to let them control you, but to finally let them belong. Because what we exile in ourselves does not disappear. It waits, it aches, and it whispers, I am still part of you. Jung believed that anxiety, depression, and neurosis are not just problems to solve. They are calls to reintegration, to face the shadow, to hold your contradictions, to walk into the chaos, and find yourself there, still breathing, still enough. Wholeness is not found in clarity, but in acceptance. It's found in no longer needing to hide the messy, misunderstood parts of you, because they are not your shame. They are your story. They are your doorway back to truth. You return to yourself not when everything is fixed, but when nothing inside you needs to be denied anymore. This is what Jung meant when he said, I'd rather be whole than good. Because goodness, as the world defines it, is often a performance. But wholeness is real, it's raw, it's alive. You will still feel fear, you will still feel doubt, but you will feel it from within yourself, not from behind a mask. And that changes everything. Because once you come home to yourself, you no longer need to chase peace. You become it. You no longer need to silence anxiety because its voice becomes part of your wisdom. This is not the end of the journey. This is the place where journeys begin, from truth, from courage, from wholeness. Your anxiety is not your enemy. It's your compass. Not a curse to be cured, but a message to be heard. A map written in symptoms, pointing you back to the places within you've long abandoned. We are taught to escape discomfort, to fear pain, to silence what hurts. But Jung knew better. He knew that the soul speaks in symbols and symptoms, and that anxiety is the soul's language when we've forgotten how to listen. Every panic, every ache, every silent night full of questions, they were not signs of failure. They were invitations to return, to slow down, to remember, to stop running from the parts of yourself that are still waiting to be seen. You don't need to fix everything. You don't need to heal all at once. You don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to stop pretending that your anxiety is meaningless. Because it's not. It's the signal that something inside you still cares, still hopes, still believes that you're meant for something deeper. And the moment you stop fighting it, the moment you stop numbing, hiding, escaping, you begin to see it clearly, that your anxiety is not a wall, it's a doorway, and on the other side of it is you. The real you, the whole you, the one you were always becoming, beneath the noise, beneath the pressure, beneath the lie of the perfect life. So if you feel lost, don't look away. Look inward, and you'll see you were never broken. You were only being called back to the soul you left behind.